I discovered the missing $53,000 on a Tuesday afternoon in March while reviewing our HOA's quarterly financial statements in my cramped home office in Scottsdale, Arizona. The numbers had been bothering me for weeks, a persistent itch in the back of my mind that something was fundamentally wrong with how our community funds were being managed. I'm Vincent Morrison, a 42-year-old software engineer who had reluctantly joined the Saguaro Ridge Homeowners Association board 2 years earlier, thinking it would be a simple way to give back to my neighborhood. I had no idea that decision would turn my life into a legal battlefield that would consume the next 8 months of my existence. The spreadsheet on my laptop screen told a story that made my stomach turn. Monthly landscape maintenance payments to Desert Bloom Landscaping had increased by 40% over the past year, yet our common areas looked worse than ever. The grass in the community park was patchy and brown, the flower beds were overgrown with weeds, and the palm trees lining our main boulevard had not been trimmed in months. I cross-referenced the invoices against the actual work performed, documented with my own photographs and notes I had been keeping. The math was damning. Either we were paying for services never rendered, or someone was pocketing the difference. My wife Sarah had warned me about getting too involved with the HOA. She knew my tendency to dig into problems until they were solved, a trait that served me well in debugging code but had caused friction in other areas of my life. But this was different. This was our community, our neighbors' money, and potentially criminal fraud. I could not look away. I spent the next 3 days building a comprehensive report. I pulled bank statements, cross-referenced vendor invoices, examined payment authorizations, and documented every discrepancy I could find. The pattern became clearer with each hour of investigation. Brenda Patterson, our HOA president and a 54-year-old real estate agent with perfectly maintained blonde highlights and a permanent expression of disapproval, had signature authority on all checks over $500. Every suspicious payment bore her authorization. More troubling, Desert Bloom Landscaping had been registered as an LLC just 6 months before receiving their first HOA contract, and the registered agent was listed as Patricia Bloomfield, who happened to be Brenda's sister-in-law. The connection was too obvious to ignore. I had stumbled onto what appeared to be a classic kickback scheme. Brenda was funneling HOA money to a company controlled by her family, inflating invoices and splitting the profits. If my calculations were correct, the total fraud exceeded $70,000 over 18 months. I knew I had to report this through proper channels. Our HOA bylaws required board members to act in the community's best interest and report any suspected financial irregularities. I prepared copies of my findings and requested an emergency board meeting, citing urgent financial matters that required immediate attention. The meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday evening at the community center, a modest building that smelled perpetually of stale coffee and industrial carpet cleaner. I arrived early, my evidence organized in a manila folder that felt heavy with implications. The other board members trickled in. Marcus Chen, our vice president and a retired accountant who usually deferred to Brenda on all matters, Jennifer Walsh, the secretary, a nervous woman in her 30s who worked from home doing medical transcription, and Robert Hayes, our treasurer, a divorced contractor in his 50s who I had always considered reasonable and fair-minded. Brenda arrived last, sweeping into the room with the self-importance of someone who considered herself the neighborhood's benevolent dictator. She wore a cream-colored blazer over pressed slacks, her makeup impeccable, her smile tight and practiced. I had seen that smile deployed against countless homeowners who dared to paint their shutters the wrong shade or plant unapproved desert landscaping. "Let's make this quick," Brenda announced, not bothering with pleasantries. "I have a showing at 8. Vincent, you called this meeting. What's so urgent it couldn't wait until our regular session next month?" I took a breath and opened my folder. I've discovered significant financial irregularities in our HOA accounts, specifically payments to our landscape contractor that don't match the services actually provided to the community. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Brenda's smile vanished, replaced by a hardness in her eyes that I had never seen directed at me before. "That's a serious accusation. I hope you have substantial evidence to support it." "I do." I distributed copies of my report to each board member. Over the past 18 months, we've paid Desert Bloom Landscaping over $120,000. However, the actual work performed, documented here with photographs and timestamps, suggests we should have paid approximately $70,000 based on our contract rates and scope of work. Marcus flipped through the pages, his expression troubled. Jennifer looked like she wanted to disappear into her chair. Robert leaned forward, studying the numbers with the focused attention of someone who understood financial documents. "This is ridiculous," Brenda said, her voice rising. "Desert Bloom is a reputable company. If the landscaping isn't up to your personal standards, Vincent, that's hardly evidence of fraud." "It's not about my standards," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "It's about documented services versus billed services. I have invoices here that charge us for weekly maintenance that provably didn't happen. I have photographs of our common areas showing neglect that contradicts the scope of work we're paying for. And I have a concerning connection. The owner of Desert Bloom Landscaping is registered as Patricia Bloomfield, who I believe is related to you." The silence that followed was deafening. Brenda's face flushed red, and when she spoke, her words came out clipped and angry. "Patricia is my sister-in-law, yes, and I disclosed that relationship when the board approved the contract 2 years ago. Are you accusing me of something, Vincent?" "I'm presenting evidence of financial irregularities that require investigation," I said. "That's my duty as a board member. I'm proposing we hire an independent forensic accountant to review our books and determine if any impropriety has occurred." Robert nodded slowly. "That seems reasonable. If everything's above board, an audit will confirm that. If there are problems, we need to know." "This is outrageous," Brenda snapped. "You're suggesting we waste community funds on an expensive audit because Vincent has decided to play detective? I've given 3 years of my life to this community, volunteering my time, dealing with constant complaints, and this is the thanks I get? Accusations and suspicion?" "Nobody's attacking you, Brenda," Marcus said quietly. "But Vincent has raised legitimate questions. We have a fiduciary duty to investigate." "Fine," Brenda said, slamming her folder shut. "Let's vote. All in favor of wasting thousands of dollars on an unnecessary audit based on Vincent's conspiracy theories?" Robert raised his hand. Marcus hesitated, then raised his as well. Jennifer looked between Brenda and me, clearly torn, then kept her hands in her lap. "That's 2 votes, Brenda said with satisfaction. "All opposed?" She and Jennifer raised their hands. "Tie vote. As president, I cast the deciding vote. Motion fails." "That's not how this works," I protested. "You can't vote on a matter where you have a clear conflict of interest. Your family member's company is the subject of investigation." "Don't lecture me on procedure," Brenda shot back. "I've been running this board since before you moved into this neighborhood. If you don't like how things are done, you're free to resign." The meeting devolved from there. I pressed for recusal and a revote. Brenda refused. Robert tried to mediate. Jennifer looked miserable. Marcus retreated into his usual passive deference. We accomplished nothing except establishing that Brenda had no intention of allowing any investigation into the landscaping contracts. I left that meeting knowing I had only one option left. The next morning, I contacted the Arizona Attorney General's office and filed a formal complaint alleging HOA fraud. I also sent a detailed report to the Arizona Department of Real Estate, which had jurisdiction over HOA management companies and could investigate potential violations of state HOA statutes. For 2 weeks, I heard nothing. Life continued with an uncomfortable normalcy. I went to work, came home, avoided running into Brenda around the neighborhood. Sarah supported my decision but worried about the consequences. "You've made an enemy," she said one evening as we sat on our back patio watching the sunset paint the desert sky in shades of orange and pink. "Brenda is not someone who forgives." She was right. The retaliation began in early April with a formal letter delivered to my mailbox on HOA letterhead. The special board meeting had been called for the following Tuesday, and I was the sole agenda item. The stated purpose: discussion and potential action regarding removal of board member Vincent Morrison for conduct detrimental to the association. I stared at that letter for a long time, anger and disbelief competing in my chest. They were going to try to kick me off the board for reporting fraud. It was so blatant, so obvious, that I almost could not believe they would attempt it. The meeting was held in the same community center, but this time nearly 40 homeowners packed the small room. Word had spread through the neighborhood that something dramatic was happening. I recognized faces from block parties and holiday gatherings, people I considered friends and neighbors, all curious about this unexpected controversy. Brenda called the meeting to order with her usual efficiency. She looked composed and professional, every inch the responsible community leader. "We're here tonight to address a serious matter concerning one of our board members. Vincent Morrison has engaged in conduct that I believe is detrimental to this association and violates his duties as a board member." She proceeded to present her case, and it was a masterclass in spin and misdirection. According to Brenda, I had made wild accusations without evidence, disrupted board operations, wasted meeting time with baseless conspiracy theories, and damaged the HOA's relationship with a valued vendor. She painted herself as a dedicated volunteer under attack by a board member who had gone rogue and was pursuing a personal vendetta. Vincent has filed complaints with state agencies, Brenda told the assembled homeowners, her voice heavy with disappointment. He's accused this board of fraud, despite having no qualifications in accounting or financial investigation. He's created a hostile work environment that makes it impossible for the board to function effectively. For the good of this community, I'm asking the board to remove Vincent Morrison from his position. The presentation was effective. I could see homeowners nodding, their expressions troubled. Without context or evidence, I looked like exactly what Brenda described, an overzealous troublemaker disrupting community harmony. When Brenda finished, she turned to me with a cold smile. "Vincent, do you have anything to say before we vote?" I stood, my heart pounding, and addressed the room. I explained what I had found in the financial records. I showed photographs of our neglected common areas, contrasted with invoices charging premium rates. I outlined the family connection between Brenda and the landscaping company owner. I emphasized that I had followed proper procedure, reported suspected fraud as required by law, and was now being punished for doing exactly what my duty as a board member demanded. "This is retaliation," I concluded. "Pure and simple. I reported suspected fraud, and now the person I reported is trying to silence me by removing me from the board. That's illegal under Arizona law. There are anti-retaliation statutes specifically designed to protect whistleblowers from exactly this kind of punishment." Several homeowners looked convinced, but others appeared skeptical. Brenda had years of goodwill built up in the community. I was the relative newcomer making explosive accusations. Marcus spoke up, his voice apologetic. "Vincent, I think you've raised some concerns that deserve attention, but the way you've gone about this, filing complaints with state agencies without exhausting internal remedies first, has created legal exposure for the HOA. That's a legitimate concern." "I tried internal remedies," I countered. "I brought evidence to the board. I was voted down on procedural grounds. What was I supposed to do? Just watch community funds disappear?" "You were supposed to trust the board's judgment," Brenda said sharply. "Instead, you've damaged this community's reputation and cost us time and money responding to your baseless allegations. We need board members who work as part of a team, not vigilantes who think they're above the rules." The vote was 3-1 to remove me from the board. Marcus, Jennifer, and Brenda voted yes. Only Robert voted no, and he looked deeply uncomfortable doing so. Just like that, my 2 years of service were erased, my position terminated, and I was escorted from what had been my seat at the table. Walking out of that community center, past the curious and sometimes hostile stares of my neighbors, was one of the lowest moments of my life. I felt angry, betrayed, and powerless. Sarah hugged me when I got home and told me we would figure it out, but I could see the worry in her eyes. We had never been the kind of people who courted conflict or controversy. This was new territory, and neither of us was certain how to navigate it. The next morning, I contacted an attorney. Her name was Margaret Foster, a sharply intelligent woman in her early 50s who specialized in HOA law and had handled several high-profile cases involving board misconduct. Her office was in downtown Phoenix, occupying the 14th floor of a glass building with views of the valley sprawling in every direction. Margaret listened to my story without interruption, occasionally making notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and studied me thoughtfully. You did the right thing reporting this. Arizona has strong anti-retaliation protections for HOA board members who report suspected violations. Arizona Revised Statute Section 33, 1811 specifically prohibits removing a board member in retaliation for filing a good faith complaint with a government agency. So I can get my seat back? I asked, hope flickering in my chest. Potentially, yes. We'll need to file a lawsuit alleging violations of the Anti-Retaliation statute. We'll ask the court to reinstate you to the board and possibly seek damages for the retaliation. The burden will be on us to prove that your removal was motivated by your fraud complaint rather than legitimate concerns about your conduct. How do we prove that? I asked. Timeline, documentation, and motive, Margaret explained. You filed your fraud complaint, and within weeks they initiated removal proceedings. There's no documented history of performance issues or conduct problems before your complaint. The stated reasons for removal are pretextual. They're punishing you for whistleblowing, and that's illegal. We spent the next 2 hours going through every document, email, and piece of evidence I had accumulated. Margaret was thorough and exacting, pushing me to remember details and fill in gaps. By the end of the consultation, I felt cautiously optimistic. This was not just a neighborhood squabble anymore. This was a legal matter with clear statutes and protections. Margaret filed the lawsuit the following week. The complaint was straightforward. Vincent Morrison versus Saguaro Ridge Homeowners Association, alleging violations of Arizona's Anti-Retaliation statute and seeking reinstatement to the board, nominal damages, and attorney's fees. We served the HOA and Brenda personally, ensuring they understood this was serious. The response was swift and aggressive. The HOA hired a large Phoenix law firm that specialized in defending associations. Their answer to our complaint denied all allegations and asserted that my removal was based entirely on legitimate concerns about my conduct and judgment. They filed a counterclaim alleging that I had breached my fiduciary duties as a board member and defamed Brenda and the HOA with my fraud accusations. The legal battle that followed consumed the next 4 months. Discovery was contentious, with both sides fighting over every document and deposition. Margaret subpoenaed the HOA's financial records, bank statements, and all communications related to Desert Bloom Landscaping. The HOA's attorneys fought these requests at every turn, claiming they were overly broad and burdensome. But slowly, inevitably, the truth emerged. The bank records showed that Desert Bloom had billed the HOA for services on dates when no work was performed. Emails between Brenda and Patricia revealed discussions about maximizing billable hours and keeping the contract amounts high. A forensic accountant that Margaret hired independently analyzed the records and concluded that the HOA had overpaid Desert Bloom by at least $68,000 over the 18-month period I had identified. The turning point came during Brenda's deposition in early July. Margaret was relentless, walking Brenda through every invoice, every authorization, every communication with her sister-in-law. Under oath, Brenda's carefully constructed explanations began to crumble. She contradicted herself multiple times, claimed not to remember crucial details, and grew increasingly defensive and hostile. "You removed Vincent Morrison from the board on April 15th, Margaret stated, reading from her notes. Less than 3 weeks after he filed a complaint with the Attorney General's office alleging fraud, correct? The timing was coincidental, Brenda insisted. Vincent had been a problem for months. Really? Can you point me to any documentation of his poor performance or misconduct before he filed his fraud complaint? Silence. Brenda's attorney jumped in with objections, but the damage was done. There was no paper trail of previous issues, because there had been no previous issues. My removal was clearly retaliatory. The evidence became overwhelming. In late July, Margaret received a call from the Arizona Attorney General's office. Their investigation had been proceeding parallel to our lawsuit, and they had reached conclusions that mirrored our findings. They were prepared to file criminal charges against Brenda for theft, fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty. Patricia Bloomfield would also face charges for her role in the scheme. With criminal prosecution looming, the HOA's legal position became untenable. Their attorneys reached out to Margaret to discuss settlement. The negotiations were tense and sometimes bitter, but the outcome was inevitable. In mid-August, We signed a settlement agreement that gave me everything I had asked for and more. The terms were comprehensive. First, I would be immediately reinstated to the HOA board with full rights and privileges. Second, Brenda would resign from all HOA positions effective immediately and be permanently banned from serving in any HOA leadership role. Third, the HOA would hire an independent management company to oversee finances and operations while new board elections were organized. Fourth, the HOA would pay my attorney's fees in full, which had exceeded $40,000. Fifth, and perhaps most importantly, the HOA would cooperate fully with the criminal prosecution of Brenda Patterson and Patricia Bloomfield. The settlement was presented to the full HOA membership at a special meeting in late August. This time, the community center was packed beyond capacity, with people standing along the walls and sitting on the floor. Everyone wanted to see how this neighborhood drama would resolve. Robert Hayes, serving as interim president after Brenda's forced resignation, read the settlement terms aloud. When he finished, he looked directly at me. "Vincent, on behalf of this board and this community, I want to apologize. You did the right thing, and we punished you for it. That was wrong, and I'm sorry." The applause that followed was not universal, but it was substantial. I returned to my board seat that evening, and the relief I felt was profound. This had never been about ego or power. It had been about doing what was right, even when it was difficult and costly. The criminal case against Brenda and Patricia proceeded through the fall. The Maricopa County District Attorney's Office charged both women with multiple felonies: theft, fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and conspiracy. The evidence was damning, and their defense attorneys advised them to negotiate plea agreements rather than risk trial. In October, both women appeared before a judge in Maricopa County Superior Court. Brenda pleaded guilty to 1 count of theft and 1 count of breach of fiduciary duty. Patricia pleaded guilty to fraud and conspiracy. The sentencing hearing was held in November, and I attended as a representative of the HOA. The judge was a stern woman in her 60s who had clearly reviewed the case thoroughly. She listened to the prosecutor's sentencing recommendation, then the defense attorney's pleas for leniency. Finally, she addressed Brenda and Patricia directly. "You were entrusted with a position of responsibility in your community," the judge said, her voice carrying throughout the courtroom. "Homeowners relied on you to manage their funds honestly and transparently. Instead, you saw that trust as an opportunity for personal enrichment. You stole from your neighbors, and when someone had the courage to expose your conduct, you tried to destroy him. That shows a profound lack of character and integrity." Brenda received 2 years in prison, followed by 3 years of probation. Patricia received 18 months in prison and 3 years of probation. Both were ordered to pay full restitution of $68,000 to the HOA. The judge made clear that she was imposing prison time specifically because of the breach of trust and the retaliatory conduct. This was not just theft. It was an abuse of power that demanded accountability. Watching Brenda being led away in handcuffs after the sentencing was surreal. This woman who had wielded such power in our neighborhood, who had commanded meetings and intimidated homeowners, was now a convicted felon heading to prison. There was no satisfaction in it, only a weary sense that justice had been served at great cost to everyone involved. The HOA spent the following months rebuilding trust and operations. We hired a professional management company that implemented proper financial controls and transparent reporting. New board elections were held in December, and I chose to run again. The vote was not close. Homeowners who had initially been skeptical of my accusations now understood what had really happened. I won re-election with over 80% of the vote. Sarah and I hosted a small holiday gathering at our house that December, inviting some of the neighbors who had supported us through the ordeal. Robert was there, as was Marcus, who had apologized privately for not standing up to Brenda sooner. Jennifer had resigned from the board entirely, too uncomfortable with the conflict and attention. We understood. Standing on my back patio that evening, watching the sun set over the Superstition Mountains in the distance, I reflected on everything that had happened. 8 months earlier, I'd been a reluctant board member who just wanted to contribute to his community. Then, I'd discovered evidence of fraud and made a choice to report it, knowing it would cause disruption and conflict. That choice had cost me time, money, stress, and peace of mind. I'd been attacked, defamed, and removed from a volunteer position I had earned through service. I'd been forced to file a lawsuit and fight for months to reclaim my seat and clear my name. But I had also learned something fundamental about courage and integrity. Sometimes doing the right thing means standing alone, facing criticism and hostility, and trusting that truth will eventually prevail. The anti-retaliation statutes that protected me were not just legal technicalities. They were society's recognition that whistleblowers perform a crucial service and must be shielded from revenge by those they expose. Without those protections, without the legal framework that punished the HOA for firing me in retaliation, corruption would flourish unchecked. The new board I served on was different from the old one. We implemented quarterly financial reviews with full transparency. Every invoice and payment was documented and made available to homeowners. We established clear conflict of interest policies that required board members to recuse themselves from any vote involving family members or personal financial interests. We created a whistleblower policy that encouraged anyone who suspected misconduct to report it without fear of retaliation. Most importantly, we rebuilt trust. That took longer than any legal proceeding. It required consistency, honesty, and a willingness to acknowledge past failures. Slowly, month by month, homeowners who had been alienated by the scandal began to re-engage. People started attending meetings again, volunteering for committees, participating in community events. The neighborhood that had been fractured by betrayal and conflict began to heal. The landscaping contract was rebid properly, with multiple vendors submitting proposals that were evaluated based on price, service quality, and references. We selected a company called Arizona Landscape Solutions that had been in business for 15 years and had stellar reviews from other HOA clients. Within weeks of taking over the maintenance contract, our common areas began to look better. The grass was green and trimmed, flower beds were replanted with native desert plants that required less water, palm trees were properly maintained. It was remarkable how much improvement we saw when we were actually getting what we paid for. I ran into one of the homeowners who had been skeptical of my fraud allegations at the grocery store one Saturday morning. Her name was Phyllis, a retired schoolteacher in her 70s who had lived in Saguaro Ridge for over a decade. She approached me in the produce section, looking slightly embarrassed. "Vincent, I owe you an apology," she said without preamble. "I thought you were making a mountain out of a molehill with all that fraud talk. I didn't believe Brenda would steal from us. I was wrong, and I'm sorry." "You don't need to apologize," I told her. Brenda had built up years of goodwill. It was natural to give her the benefit of the doubt. "Maybe," Phyllis conceded, "but you stuck your neck out when nobody else would. That took guts. Thank you for caring enough to fight." Those words meant more to me than the legal victory, more than being reinstated to the board, more than any vindication I had received. This was a neighbor, a member of my community, recognizing that what I had done mattered. That made all the difficulty worthwhile. The forensic accounting firm Margaret had hired completed a comprehensive audit of the HOA's finances in January, about 10 months after I first discovered the discrepancies. Their final report confirmed that the fraud had totaled just over $72,000 when all invoices and payments were fully analyzed. The Desert Bloom scheme had been the largest component, but the auditors also found smaller irregularities, inflated invoices from a pool maintenance company that Brenda had approved without competitive bidding, payments for supplies that were never delivered, and questionable expense reimbursements that Brenda had authorized for herself. The audit report included recommendations for financial controls and oversight procedures to prevent future fraud. We implemented every single recommendation. The board approved hiring an independent CPA firm to review our books quarterly and present findings to homeowners. We established dual signature requirements for all checks over $1,000. We mandated competitive bidding for any contract exceeding $10,000 annually. We created a financial transparency page on the HOA website where homeowners could review current budgets, expenditures, and vendor contracts. These changes cost money and required effort, but they were essential. Trust is difficult to build and easy to destroy. We had learned that lesson the hard way. The restitution payments from Brenda and Patricia were structured through the criminal court system. Each woman was required to pay monthly installments toward the $68,000 total judgment. The payments were modest, just a few $100s per month from each of them, reflecting their limited financial resources. At that rate, full restitution would take years, but at least the HOA was recovering some of what had been stolen. Desert Bloom Landscaping ceased operations shortly after Patricia's arrest. The business had been little more than a shell company designed to facilitate the fraud. Without the HOA contract and with its owner facing criminal charges, there was no reason for it to continue existing. The company's business license was revoked, and its registration was dissolved. My lawsuit against the HOA was formally dismissed in December once the settlement agreement had been fully executed. Margaret filed a satisfaction of judgment, and the case was closed. I paid her final invoice, feeling it was money well spent. She had not only secured my reinstatement, but it also helped expose a criminal enterprise and protect the community from further exploitation. Margaret and I stayed in touch after the case concluded. She told me that HOA fraud cases were more common than most people realized. Positions of trust combined with limited oversight created opportunities for those inclined to abuse their authority. Board members who stole from their communities often justified it with rationalizations. They were not being paid for their time, the amounts were small, nobody would notice, the community could afford it. The rationalizations were always wrong, but they allowed people like Brenda to sleep at night while systematically looting their neighbors. The whistleblower protections that had enabled my reinstatement existed precisely because retaliation was so common. People who reported fraud within organizations, whether businesses or HOAs or government agencies, faced enormous pressure to stay quiet. They were fired, demoted, ostracized, and punished for speaking truth to power. Anti-retaliation statutes were society's attempt to protect those brave enough to report wrongdoing, recognizing that without such protections, corruption would flourish. I became something of a minor expert on HOA law after my experience. Other homeowners in neighboring communities reached out to me with questions about their own associations. I spoke at a local HOA management conference about the importance of financial transparency and board accountability. I even testified before a state legislative committee that was considering reforms to Arizona's HOA statutes, sharing my story as an example of why whistleblower protections mattered. The experience changed me in ways I had not anticipated. I had always been someone who avoided conflict, who preferred to work quietly behind the scenes rather than draw attention. Being forced to stand up publicly to fight for what was right despite opposition and hostility had revealed strength I did not know I possessed. Sarah said I seemed more confident, more willing to speak my mind when something bothered me. I supposed she was right. The new Saguaro Ridge HOA board developed a positive reputation in the broader community. We were featured in a local newspaper article about effective HOA governance, highlighting our transparency measures and community engagement. Other associations contacted us asking about our financial control policies and whistleblower protections. We shared everything freely, hoping other communities could learn from our painful experience without having to go through it themselves. Robert served as HOA president through the transition period and did an excellent job rebuilding relationships and restoring confidence. He chose not to run for another term in the following election cycle, feeling he had accomplished what he set out to do. I was elected president in his place, a responsibility I accepted with some trepidation, but also a sense of duty. This community had been through trauma, and I wanted to help it fully heal. One of my first acts as president was to establish a community service award in honor of the homeowners who had supported the fraud investigation and helped hold the previous board accountable. The award recognized residents who demonstrated integrity, courage, and commitment to the community's well-being. Robert was the first recipient, and he accepted it with genuine emotion at a community meeting that felt more like a celebration than a business session. We also implemented regular community events designed to bring neighbors together in positive ways. Monthly potlucks in the park, quarterly neighborhood garage sales, an annual holiday light display contest, a community garden where residents could maintain small plots and grow vegetables. These activities had nothing to do with governance or financial oversight, but they were crucial for rebuilding the social bonds that had been strained by the fraud scandal and its aftermath. Sarah became more involved in HOA activities as well, joining the social committee and helping organize events. She said she was proud of what I had accomplished, but wanted to contribute in her own way. Her warmth and organizational skills made her a natural fit, and homeowners who might have been intimidated approaching me found her much more approachable. We became a team serving the community together. The criminal prosecution of Brenda and Patricia concluded with their sentencing in November, but the civil implications continued. Several homeowners whose property values had been affected by the scandal and the poor maintenance of common areas filed a class action lawsuit against Brenda personally, seeking damages beyond the criminal restitution. That case was still pending as of my last knowledge, though Brenda's bankruptcy filing would likely limit any recovery. Patricia's husband divorced her shortly after her guilty plea, claiming he had been unaware of the fraud scheme. Whether that was true or a convenient legal fiction was unclear, but the divorce proceeded quickly and quietly. Patricia lost her home in the settlement and was living with relatives by the time she began her prison sentence. The human cost of the fraud extended far beyond the financial losses. Families were destroyed, reputations were ruined, and trust was shattered. Brenda's children, both adults, cut off contact with their mother after learning the full extent of her crimes. Her real estate career was over, her license revoked, her professional reputation destroyed beyond repair. Patricia faced similar consequences, losing not just her freedom and her marriage, but also her standing in the community and her future prospects. I felt no pleasure in their downfall. Brenda had made choices that harmed many people, and she deserved to be held accountable for those choices. But the entire situation was tragic and avoidable. If she had simply done the job she had volunteered for, honestly and ethically, none of this would have happened. Instead, greed and entitlement had led her down a path that destroyed her life and damaged an entire community. The experience also taught me about the importance of institutional safeguards. Individual integrity mattered, but systems and structures mattered more. Even honest people could be tempted or corrupted without proper oversight and accountability. The financial controls we implemented, the transparency requirements, the conflict of interest policies, these were not signs of distrust, but rather recognition of human nature and the need for checks and balances. As the first anniversary of my reinstatement approached in August, the HOA board discussed how to acknowledge the milestone. We decided to host a community forum focused on financial transparency and good governance, inviting experts to speak about best practices and lessons learned. The event was well attended, drawing not just Saguaro Ridge residents but also board members and homeowners from surrounding communities. Margaret Foster was our keynote speaker, and she delivered a powerful presentation about whistleblower rights and anti-retaliation protections. She emphasized that laws protecting people who report wrongdoing were only effective if individuals had the courage to use them. Vincent Morrison could have looked the other way, she told the audience. He could have decided the fraud was not his problem, that exposing it would cause too much trouble, that staying quiet was easier. But he chose to act, and that choice protected this entire community from continued exploitation. That's what integrity looks like. The applause that followed was warm and sustained. I felt embarrassed by the attention, but also grateful for the recognition. The journey from discovering fraud, to reporting it, to being fired in retaliation, to fighting for reinstatement, to achieving justice had been long and difficult. Having it acknowledged publicly helped provide a sense of closure. During the question and answer portion of the forum, a young woman who had recently purchased a home in a different neighborhood raised her hand. "How do you know when something is worth reporting?" she asked. "How do you distinguish between honest mistakes and actual fraud?" It was a good question, one I had grappled with myself. "Start by documenting concerns and gathering evidence," I answered. "Don't jump to conclusions, but also don't ignore red flags. If something seems wrong, it probably is. Trust your instincts, but verify with facts. And remember, reporting suspected wrongdoing is not an accusation, it's a request for investigation. Let qualified professionals determine whether fraud occurred." Other homeowners asked about how to protect themselves when reporting suspected misconduct. Margaret emphasized the importance of understanding state laws, documenting everything, and consulting with an attorney if retaliation seemed likely. She also stressed that anti-retaliation protections were strongest when the person reporting had acted in good faith based on reasonable evidence, not personal vendettas or unfounded speculation. The forum ran for nearly 3 hours, far longer than we had planned, because people kept asking questions and sharing their own experiences. Several attendees approached me afterward to share stories of problems in their own HOAs that they had been afraid to report. I encouraged them to document their concerns and seek legal advice, emphasizing that staying silent only enabled continued misconduct. One man, a homeowner from a community in nearby Mesa, shook my hand firmly. "Thank you for doing what you did," he said. "My HOA board has been sketchy for years, but nobody wanted to rock the boat. Hearing your story makes me think maybe it's time someone spoke up." "Just be careful and smart about it," I cautioned. "Document everything, understand your rights, and get legal counsel. But yes, if something is wrong, someone needs to speak up. These are our homes and our communities. We have a right to expect honest management." The conversations continued informally for another hour as people mingled over refreshments. Sarah stood beside me, occasionally squeezing my hand when someone shared a particularly moving story or expressed gratitude for what we had been through. This was why it had all been worth it, not the legal victory or the personal vindication, but the knowledge that our experience might help others protect their own communities. As fall arrived and the brutal Arizona summer heat finally began to moderate, life in Saguaro Ridge settled into a comfortable rhythm. The new management company was performing well, monthly financials were published transparently, and community events were well attended and enjoyed. We had confronted our problems, dealt with them honestly, and emerged stronger. The HOA's financial position had actually improved despite the cost of the fraud investigation and legal proceedings. With proper competitive bidding and oversight, our operating expenses had decreased while service quality improved. We were able to build up adequate reserves for future capital improvements, something that had been neglected under Brenda's leadership. Property values in the community stabilized and even increased slightly as word spread that we had cleaned house and implemented strong governance practices. I continued to serve on the board, but with a lighter heart than before. The weight of carrying a secret, of knowing something was wrong but uncertain if I could prove it or if anyone would believe me, had been oppressive. Now everything was out in the open, addressed and resolved. I could focus on positive contributions rather than investigative work. During a routine board meeting in October, Marcus made a motion that caught me off guard. I moved that the board formally thank Vincent Morrison for his service to this community and his courage in reporting the financial irregularities that led to the criminal investigation and prosecution of the former board president. His actions protected our community from significant additional losses and demonstrated the kind of integrity we should all aspire to. The motion was seconded immediately and passed unanimously. I felt my throat tighten with emotion. These were the same people who had voted to remove me from the board just months earlier. The transformation was remarkable and humbling. "Thank you," I managed to say. But I was just doing what anyone should do when they discover wrongdoing. The real credit goes to everyone who supported the investigation, who demanded accountability, and who worked to rebuild this community. That was a collective effort. "Maybe," Marcus replied. "But you were the one who had the courage to start it. That matters." Winter in Arizona is beautiful, and that year's holiday season in Saguaro Ridge was particularly special. The community decorated elaborately, with homes competing good-naturedly for the best light displays. We organized a neighborhood caroling event, a holiday food drive for local charities, and a community party on Christmas Eve. The atmosphere was joyful and warm, a stark contrast to the tension and division that had characterized much of the previous year. On New Year's Eve, Sarah and I sat on our back patio wrapped in blankets against the cool desert night, watching fireworks explode over the valley in the distance. "What a year," she said softly. "I'm glad it's over." "Me too," I agreed. "But I'm also grateful for what we learned and how the community came together." "Do you have any regrets?" she asked, "about reporting the fraud, fighting for your seat back, all of it?" I thought about that question seriously. The past year had been stressful, expensive, and emotionally draining. I had been attacked, defamed, and forced to defend my integrity in public. The legal battle had consumed countless hours and cost tens of thousands of dollars, even with the eventual reimbursement. My relationship with several neighbors had been permanently damaged. The easy path would have been to look away, to let someone else deal with the problem, to protect my own peace and comfort. "No regrets," I finally answered. It was hard, but it was right. I wouldn't change anything. Sarah kissed my cheek. "I'm proud of you." As midnight approached and another year began, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. A chance decision to review HOA financial statements had uncovered a crime, triggered a legal battle, and ultimately resulted in justice and reform. But more than that, it had revealed something important about community, integrity, and the responsibility we all share to speak up when we witness wrongdoing. The Anti-Retaliation statute that had protected me and secured my reinstatement was more than just legal code. It represented a societal commitment to protecting those who expose corruption and abuse. Without such protections, whistleblowers would be silenced, misconduct would flourish, and communities would suffer. The law had worked exactly as intended, providing both shield and remedy for someone punished for doing the right thing. The fireworks continued to light up the Phoenix sky, each burst of color and light celebrated by distant cheers and car horns. In our quiet neighborhood, families gathered in yards and on rooftops to watch the display and welcome the new year. We were a community again, healed and hopeful, ready to move forward together. I never wanted to be a whistleblower or a legal plaintiff or a crusader for HOA reform. I just wanted to be a good neighbor and a responsible board member. But when circumstances demanded more, when I discovered evidence of fraud that threatened my community, I had made a choice to act rather than ignore. That choice had cost me, challenged me, and ultimately changed me. And I would make the same choice again without hesitation, because some things are simply more important than comfort or convenience. Integrity is one of those things. Community is another. And the courage to defend both, even in the face of opposition and retaliation, is perhaps the most important thing of all. The story of Brenda Patterson's fraud and my fight for reinstatement became part of Saguaro Ridge's history, a cautionary tale about the importance of oversight and accountability, and also a reminder that individuals can make a difference when they choose to stand up for what is right. New homeowners moving into the neighborhood heard the story and understood that this was a community that took governance seriously, that demanded transparency, and that protected those who protected the community's interests. As I finally headed inside as the New Year's first minutes ticked away, I felt a deep sense of peace and satisfaction. The battle was over. Justice had been served, the community had healed, and I had learned lessons about courage, integrity, and the power of laws designed to protect those who speak truth to power. The Anti-Retaliation statute had given me my seat back, but more importantly, it had affirmed that doing the right thing, even when it is difficult and costly, is always worth it. That was a lesson I would carry with me forever, and one I hoped would inspire others facing similar choices in their own communities and lives.